Good evening and welcome. Hello. Are your heart beating hard now? If you haven't read Beneath Your Skin yet, the little video that you just saw will give you an idea of the type of read you can expect. And I have to say, when I picked up the book, I actually didn't put it down, I'm not kidding, until I got to the last page. I want to welcome you here tonight. I'm Kate Watson from Nimbus Publishing. I'm going to tell you a bit about the evening, and then I'm going to clear out and let these two gentlemen take over. But first, we want to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This land is governed by the treaties of peace and friendship. We recognize that we are all treaty people and have responsibilities to each other and to this land. We also recognize the 400 plus year history of communities of African descent and the 50 African Nova Scotian communities throughout our region today. We are grateful to work in Mi'kma'ki. We are continually learning more about how we can deeply engage and move forward with the work of truth, reconciliation, and equity. We recognize that without action, an acknowledgement is empty. It marks the beginning of the work ahead of us, not the end. So I want to thank everyone who has had a hand in bringing this incredible book together, including, of course, the talented author, C.S. Porter. Chris, welcome. Also, thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts and the Province of Nova Scotia, whose support makes our publishing program possible. And also to the amazing crew at Nimbus, especially our talented managing editor, Whitney Moran. This evening will be a discussion between C.S. Porter. Should I call you C.S. Porter?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. And our moderator, Jon Tattrie. And there will be time for questions from you, the audience. Just type the questions into that little chat box when you think of them, and we'll bring them up on the screen when the time comes for the answers. And now a bit about Jon Tattrie, who is going to moderate tonight. Jon Tattrie is an award-winning author and journalist. As an author, he's published 2 novels and 6 nonfiction books, including Peace by Chocolate, The Hermit of Africville, and Dan Paul Mi'kmaq Elder. He's now writing Sword and Soul, How an American Exile Rewrote Fantasy, a biography of the late Charles R. Saunders. As a journalist, he works for CBC, specializing in historic news, such as the 1969 tragedy aboard Blue Nose 2 and the discovery of an anchor in Halifax Harbor connected to the Halifax explosion. He lives in Halifax with his wife, Giselle, and their children, Rosalind and Xavier. So now over to you, Chris and Jon, and I'll bow out.
Thank you, Kate. So, Chris, let's jump right into it. The book, it starts with a bang. We're at a hunt at a gun tournament. Can you tell us who's there, what happens, and what do they see?
It's a happy Sunday. You know, it's a nice, beautiful, happy Sunday, and fathers are taking their sons out to a contest. Hay bales are set up on the shooting range to shorten the distance somewhat. Targets are put in place, and the children start firing. They're not children, but they're like 14, 15 years old. And then one of the fathers, he's a police officer. His name's Harrison. He spots something on one of the hay bales, and that starts the whole ball rolling, as it were.
Want to give us a hint of, maybe tell us a little bit of his detecting work, how he sort of turns. There's a great moment where he starts to turn from a father proud of his son to he spots something and he notices something's wrong.
He borrows his neighbor's neighbor, being on the shooting range neighbor, his super high powered binoculars, and what he thought he saw, he did see, and seeping through the paper target, is a little bit of red. I'm not going to tell you anymore. Should I? So there's something inside the hay bale, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a detective book, and we'll talk about that a little later. But one of the things I found really interesting is how eventually Cass Morris, the main detective, gets quite a crew of police officers all working on this series of grisly murders. trying to figure out what happened, trying to stop the next one. And they all work in different ways. And there's all these moments where kind of something in me echoes with something in them, and it just brings them to life so much. For example, you mentioned Harrison, the police officer at the start of it. There's a scene where they get a photo, and everybody's looking at the photo, trying to get as much information as they can from it. And most people are like, okay, the boy is about this age. The photo looks like it was taken around this year. They're trying to figure out the location, studying it for any clues. And then Harrison looks at it and he thinks, well, the photographer is taller than the boy, probably an adult. And judging by the open, friendly look on the boy's face, it's someone he knows and trusts quite well, probably a parent. And first, as a parent myself, that was one of those moments where it's like, yeah, I can tell photos taken by me or my wife versus photos taken at the school. The child looks different.
Or by another child, yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about the different detecting styles, how you crafted those, and then tell us about Kes Morris. She has quite a unique style of trying to catch her killers.
So that would be, your question about Harrison, that would be the father in him, I think. And I'm a photographer as well, so I look for things like that. So I gave him that attribute, as it were. Chester's just kind of, he's more computer oriented, less people oriented, but he's pretty tenacious. Kes is, I guess she gets right into it, like I keep thinking of a Stanislavski actor who, one who just adopts the role, or tries to, and she gets into it in that way that I think the way I see her is she tries to figure out by putting herself in the killer's position as to what's going on. She becomes quite invested that way. So those are sort of the techniques, as it were.
Yeah, and can you talk a bit more about Kes? It seems to me like through the pages we get this, painting coming in of everything she knows. The puzzle comes together, and the last piece is the shape of the killer, basically. Yeah. And the way, like the scenes, and she's in I think a hotel at one point where she's just almost meditating on the killer and thinking about the psychological. So can you talk a bit about how, she's not just looking for DNA evidence or video evidence, she's trying to understand how the killer would think to sort of from that back out and figure out who they are.
Well, that would also put her one step ahead if she can figure out where they're going in that regard. But then the nice thing I thought was to make one of the killers almost her equal, or her equal, actually. And so she knows there's someone very adept and clever that she's trying to find. And the concept of animal comes up a lot. She knows that they're skilled, animalistic, strong, probably don't have a lot of conscience, as it were. And so I think she really focuses to the detriment of her life, her personal life, I think. She focuses on that task at hand.
Yeah, can you talk a bit about that cost of, because she almost like has to give herself permission to think the most horrific thoughts she can. Like if you wanted to murder somebody, how would you, Kes, go about doing it? And how would you have to be different to be the killer?
So the cost to her is grave. If she's that absorbed, if she gets that absorbed in the killer's métier, she loses a little bit of herself. Like her father, she remembers her father telling her, "You've got to make sure when it's over, when whatever case you're on is over, that you shake it off somehow. You brush out, like you get underneath his skin, but you've got to brush it off after. You can't let any of those particles linger." So she's pretty, what do you call it? She's determined, and incredibly persistent in that way of transferring herself into a killer's soul. I think that's what she does the most.
And I wondered how that related to your approach as a writer in terms of there, as I say, there's a lot of people in this. It's a full small town, and it seems to me that everyone from the people working at the bar, the people at the docks, they all seem, absolutely real individual, and that rare ability in a book where you can tell they have their own motivations, their own inner things that they want to get out of any scenario. So how did you, as a writer, kind of conceptually think about these people and figure out what makes them tick? And did you have like charts to keep track of who did what? And how did you go about keeping this cast of characters alive and advancing?
Yeah, so I think this start for me, the way I the way I started it was to create the bones, the architecture of it. So the town was the town, so that was fairly simple for me because I live here. Then it was the story, building out the story, fleshing out where it started and where it ended. Kes just came to me. I told you, I think the other day, she came to me as Kika, but it was too soft a name. But I love the hard K. So she became Kes. And Harrison was always there. His son, I never thought that it was interesting to flesh him out that much. But once I knew where the story was, where the plot was, I mean, it's a murder mystery after all. Then there was a lot of work on the characters. Then they had to be fleshed out. And Kes was the toughest. Brownlee was probably a little bit more atypical, I think. Chester was unusual. The chief got quite complicated, I found. And then I wanted to give the killers like a kind of an inverse heart, like they were almost like you felt sorry for them, I think. And that made it kind of interesting. So it wasn't just black and white.
And with Kes, I think I always thought Kestrel, there's something kind of hawkish about her, the
That's
predator in her.
Yeah. That's exactly where the word Kes comes from. There's an old film called Kestrel. Yeah.
And for you as a writer, what was it like? I mean, was it familiar to you to spend this much time thinking about murder and mayhem and figuring out how all of these grisly deaths would physically, because they all have to be, they're all believed, you can see what's happening there. So what was it like for you to think through these sort of things?
I think I was a bit glib at first, and then I got more serious about it. To tell you what happened today. So, because I was thinking about doing this evening, and I get nervous about it and stuff like that. But in any case, I went into the kitchen, and the window overlooks the ocean, and a raft of ducks came up out of the ocean, like several hundred of them, I think. And when ducks fly, they've always got to start by going against the wind. And they seem to be panicking, But anyway, so I looked, and there was a beautiful raft of ducks. And then I was doing whatever, I was writing notes or whatever. And then I looked back out, and a big hawk was coming. And then the ducks came back the other way. And then all of a sudden there was a story there. And I had to go out on the front deck so that I wasn't pinned in by the window, because I had to see what was going to happen. Would the hawk get a duck? And I think there's that kind of weird perverted intrigue in me anyway, to invent something that is obscure and to try to make it real. I mean, I thought the killings in the hay bales was just terrible, but I thought it was possible. Everything had to be possible. And I also think that you and I both have read a lot of murder mystery books. I think we kind of get a kick out of them. They're resolved, as it were. And a lot of them don't really touch the murders the way I think that I wanted to. I wanted to make it like real. And that gave Kes more vibrancy as well, that she could deal with that. I mean, I don't think I could actually deal with it. Yeah.
And you've talked about the location a lot, and it's fascinating the way you use location, because I'm pretty sure I could read the whole book, and then you could tell me that the word Nova Scotia I don't think appears once in it,
No.
or Lunenburg, and I'm pretty, I wouldn't believe you at first, and when I got to the end, I was like, did he mention? No, not at all.
Yeah.
And so there's that goal in writing that the very specific becomes universal.
Uh-huh.
The more detailed in one person, one place you are, the more somehow everybody can relate to that. And the location in here, it's as someone who knows Lunenburg fairly well, it's obviously where you're talking about. And there's one point where the character is where somebody's driving into Lunenburg, and they're like, "Don't forget to go up the hill."
Yeah,
and I had one of those moments where I was like, that's what I say to myself. I know exactly that weird intersection you're talking about, where you want to go down there because it looks like that, but you have to go up there
to get to the town at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And so details like that, plus the sort of sense of the city being down the road and, to the harbor, like it's all obviously very Lunenburg, and yet Lunenburg is not named. And it made, for me as a reader, it made it an interesting experience where I was pretty sure I knew where it was, but I wasn't certain. And it kind of added a almost parallel universe quality to it. So what was your thinking about location? Maybe you can talk a bit about how you sort of scouted the location and why you decided not to just say this is Lunenburg. Or
it was like about the bare bones thing I was telling you. I was always getting myself caught. At the beginning, I was always I decided very early to not make it specific, not name the streets as they really are, not name the restaurant she goes to, not name, but but to paint the picture that we know where it is. And I think we did that with the tourists, the small curio shops, the harbor right there, so on and so forth. I think that to be more specific than that, I mean, I had hoped that the book would go further than just here. If it was just here, then I could do it that way. But if it was read elsewhere, I didn't want it to be. Also, there's truth in towns. And if I stepped on truth inadvertently, that would be pretty terrible, wouldn't it? Like, oh my gosh, I actually know that someone who did that. So I just wanted to make it photographically accurate, but not named.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I know there's a certain, it can be enjoyable to read a book set in a place with the names and the streets and everything.
Yeah.
But I found that your use of very specific and not at all named, even as a local person who knows the town well, I don't know, it made it more captivating. It made me keep looking, I think, wanting to see. Were there anything you put in that was totally different from Lunenburg? Did you add any parts of the town?
No, just where the school had been, which I know exactly where it is in my mind. It's just up the Middle River, but
that was the one place I couldn't figure out because I was thinking the big school in Lunenburg, the big.
No, not that at all. Because they had to drive to get to it.
I knew it wasn't that. I mean, that was what I thought. That's the school I thought.
And the other thing at the end would have been maybe towards Maliga Lake or Fancy Lake or one of those places. But I wasn't very, very specific. But at the beginning, the Rod and Gun Club is the Rod and Gun Club in my mind, but I didn't want to name it.
You've mentioned your photography work, and that's been a big part of your life up to now. Could you talk a bit about composing a scene as a photographer versus as a writer? There is a photorealism quality to your writing, but sometimes photographers, as a journalist, I can tell you, sometimes they don't have the words there. They know how to frame a scene. So how do you frame a scene as a photographer? Who are you interested in, and how does that compare to your writing?
I think the photography that I've done that I like the most is working in the streets. And I think that, so I maybe clocked in 30 years of doing that. And I think that as you get better and better at it, you become quicker at seeing things, at compositions, visual compositions. And then if you make a good photograph, there's a story in it. Do you know? So I think that what I hope to do with this was the inverse, to make the words feel like a photograph in a sense. And I'm not very good at it yet. But I mean, there's so much you can add to color a scene visually, you know, and the smells you can add and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to get that sense in your mind as quick as I could with what words I know. Yeah.
It was very effective. You know, you see every scene so clearly. You know, it is like a series of photos. Yeah, and I saw one of your photos of it looked like maybe someone living a bit rough with a tourist boat going by the background behind them. And as you say, the story in there, and it also kind of invited you. It wasn't obvious what the story was, so it invited me to think about it, which I found in the same in your writing. It wasn't just here's what's happening. It was what do you think about what's happening? How do you feel about it, reader?
Oh, I see the people in the boat. I see them looking at me or the man. I see them all dressed up. I see them as tourists in his town, in where he lives, and yet he's outside. And he's drinking a beer, I think, on the side. And he's very proud, actually. And I kind of like it that way. I like his strength, you know, like, I think I call it gargoyle, you know, those beautiful creatures on the churches there. I can think of a lot of things. I think he's maybe feels more proud than they think he does. He's Parisian after all. Yeah.
And we talked a bit about detective fiction and genre writing, and Kate mentioned at the top that I'm working on a book involving fantasy now. So I've been reading a lot of fantasy, science fiction, and as a newcomer to it, it's interesting to figure out what are the rules of the genre. What do you want to see the characters do? You know, that's why they call it sword and sorcery or sword and soul, is because there's going to be a sword and there's going to be sorcery. Yeah. But the rules aren't written down somewhere. But with detective fiction, there do seem to be some common features that people maybe look for. Like one that I noticed is the vehicle. So anybody who's read the Ian Rankin Inspector Reeves novels can immediately think about his old beat up Saab that somehow keeps going, and it sort of represents something about him, and it's in the scene a lot because he's moving around a lot. And there's often a car, I find, and here Kat drives a Jaguar that she got from her father. So we have that, and her father was a detective who kind of trained her to take his place in a way. So you have that visual reminder of their connection, as well as, you know, it says something about her, puts her in the city, for example, you know, marks her as a city person driving around these rural back roads in her Jaguar, where Harrison, I think, has a sensible truck that's been there.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
So when you approach this, how did you think about what makes something a detective story? What rules did you want to include? Were there anything you wanted to leave out?
Yeah, I didn't want to be hackneyed, that's for sure. Yeah, I just wanted to make it as real as we could make it real. Yeah, I don't know. There's times, I'm sure you'll find it, or you have found it. There's times when you just find yourself going, yeah, that's the way they do it. But I didn't want it like that. And I hope it wasn't too much like other books. I felt that her car, I remember when we were shooting films, it was a big decision on which car to give a character. I mean, huge. And there was whole departments, and that was their job. To keep that car running, whatever it was. And if you picked a really lousy old car that suited the character, that was that person's job to keep it running. But her car was a little bit of a moment to put in a bit of history too. Like she says that car reminded her of her dad. It was sort of elegant or something like that. Stayed on the roads. The tougher the turns, the easier it was to stay on the roads. So I didn't feel that was, I didn't want to take anything. I wanted to, well, I mean, it's, there's police, they're there to solve a crime. That's what a police detective story is. But I don't know about, I never read anything that said there were rules. I just know there's a big difference between Elmore Leonard and Joe Nesbo, but it's all the same kind of thing. I wanted to make it crisp too and short, not belabor it.
Can you talk a bit about that? Yeah, why you wanted to make it crisp and short, and it barrels along. It is you can read it, pretty quickly.
I think it was the style. The sentences are short, crisp. Like a photograph, the descriptions had to be short, crisp. So you had to choose words that made it work that way. And it helped keep it moving, keep the story moving, like you were just moving and moving. So a lot of things had to come out that were written. A lot of ideas had to come out. A lot of description had to come out just to keep it snappy.
Yeah, I find with the genre, like having it as a detective story, I think it's almost like, especially novelists, we can sometimes have too much freedom and just try to, express our soul somehow through words. But it's like you need the structure of iambic pentameter or, a certain type of poetry. And then the genius is making that disappear. It's like the more restrictive the structure and the better a job you do of making it disappear, that's where the art comes from. And I think that's what you do there. You have, so it's familiar. People who like detective fiction, who like Rebus, who like, the alphabet books, they will like this. And yet it's a unique original book with new people doing new things.
That's great. You can only hope. I mean, that's great. If it read like that, that's wonderful.
And can you talk a bit about the series element to it? It's probably part of the genre thing too, is that people don't just want one book about the detective. They don't want everything explored there. And I thought it was really, especially as this is your first book, there was a really vividness to the things unanswered. Like you mentioned Harrison's son, who's on page 1, and some part of me wants him to come back in and have all of his issues resolved, or tied up. But there's all these threads leading off the stage, and I think you mentioned working in film. Like I think really good films, you feel like you're just watching a little bit of their life, and that it continues before and after the story. And
right.
Here too, with lots of, it doesn't all wrap up. It feels like it's book 10 in the series, not book 1. So how much did you think about that? And how did you go about resisting the urge to tie it all up in a pretty bow and sort of conclude every story?
I felt that would be too easy. Okay, so I'm well aware that science fiction and detective novels tend to come in series, which is, I'm not sure why. And it's interesting that nowadays what people watch the most seems to be series based, like they continue with the story as opposed to a film. I had no intention of writing another one. I just wanted to write the one book. She is still around, by the way. She's still here in the house. So there was I don't think those things end up in real life. They don't end up that cozy, do they? And getting into the psychology, of Harrison's son would have been horrible. I think that would have put the brakes on the story. So he's with his mom, so that's great. So we have hope. It's interesting. A lot of the reviews I've read said, we hope it's the beginning of a new series. As it turns out now, I think it is. It's a curious thing, isn't it?
And I think that's maybe part of the sort of genre rules that restrict and free, is that you kind of know that not everything's going to be tied up, that Kess's personal journey isn't going to be resolved. So it's like you can pick away at her story off stage while she continues to solve, work
That's
on.
true. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, all those things. Oh, that's answered in the next book. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Yeah.
We do have a request for a reading. I'm not sure, Kate, maybe you could chime in with what time you want to switch to the Q&A. I've got a few more questions.
A few more questions, maybe a little reading, and then Q&A at 1:45 or something. Yeah. But yeah, I do see the desire for a reading as well.
So the last question I'll ask you then, Chris, is given this was your first book, right? Your first
Yes.
first written or first published? First written too?
It doesn't matter, I guess. So I've got MS, so I can't really walk around anymore. I can't work on films anymore. So sitting here in the house, I thought, let's try. So I've been trying to write, and I always wanted to tackle one of these. So I decided to make the effort, and then COVID came, and so I had to be in the house anyway. And so I actually started to enjoy it a lot. So it was a learning process, that's for sure.
And so the last question I'll ask then is, sometimes, especially first-time novelists, you can kind of, speaking from personal experience, finish typing it and kind of hope somebody will just rip it out of the printer, publish it, and hand you all the awards. And then you discover there are editors. And sometimes writers, kind of have an allergic reaction to somebody working, somebody else taking a look at their work. But personally, I found it's the secret to being a great writer is having great editors tell you all the dumb things you've done and help you fix them up. So what was it like for you working with, there's a lot of great editors at Nimbus. What was it like for you to work with them, and how much did the story change as you went through that part of
it? About ripping it out of the typewriter?
Yeah.
What's
the hand to the editors? How much of that?
Well, no, I was just thinking, because I've loved reading for years and years and years, and I had no idea what it took. I mean, that little book was months and months and months and months. And then it was Whitney Moran at Nimbus who edited at the end. And she didn't seem to have an issue with the flow. It was more kind of tense point of view, which is great. I really loved her notes on point of view, and just a little more energy given to a certain, like after Kess was blown back by the explosion, she wanted us to sense more of what that felt like, and things like that, which was great. And also her father was a police officer and gave us notes on what was actual and what maybe, no, you shouldn't say that. You can't say walkie-talkie, or, like, just to make it more real. So yeah, I think it's a really hard process. But I think I'll be much more grateful this time. To be honest. I mean, you're your own editor for a while there, aren't you? And then it's got to go to someone who knows more than you, or who's outside of it, because you become very close to it, don't you? Your words.
Yeah, Stephen King's, as he puts it, you write with the door closed and you edit with the door open.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Would you treat us to a reading?
Oh.
I'll make myself scarce and turn the floor over to you.
No, don't do that.
I'll be back.
Don't do that. Huh. Directly across from her was a log cabin set against a copse of sugar maples with a thin hose running between the trunks. The cabin was meager. It didn't appear well made, and certainly wasn't well kept. There was a burn pile near the center of the clearing, and a stack of rusted metal next to a woodshed and an outhouse. It was certainly remote and dead quiet. A young deer, I'm going to jump ahead. Kess looked to the house and noticed a single wooden chair propped next to the front door. Rakes was accustomed to being alone. She noticed the chopping block and axe nearby and looked back to the road. He would have seen anyone coming in, probably would have heard a vehicle for miles. She looked to the dense woods ringing the clearing. It seemed impassable. She swiped away a black fly and took a step forward. A branch snapped loudly underfoot. A young deer crashed from the woods behind her and bolted towards the cabin. She watched, amazed at its speed, sure-footedness, and graceful bounds. There were still white flecks on its back. She marveled at the power of its hindquarters. It was dazzling, and Kess felt fortunate to see it. It leapt, and for a fraction of a second it seemed to freeze in midair. She saw the glint of wire, and the deer's front legs wrenched back, neck outstretched. It crashed chest first into the ground, and her world exploded.
Beautiful. And that's like, in terms of the writing, like it's a great thing. It also shows how, this is the deer. Is this the same deer I take it on the cover? Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's, they picked that. The Nimbus people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great scene because I won't give away exactly how well it works, but it shows us kind of the heart of the story in a way, in an indirect way.
Cool.
That's great. So, Kate, did you want to open it up to questions, or should we just, people, I guess, can put it in the chat? Oh, there we go. So the first question is, what are the chances that Cass will return to the same town for the next book? So tell us what
None.
Next.
None. No chance the same town. And there's only one, or as it lies now, there is no chance of her returning to the same town. It's somewhere else. And there is one character returning, as it sits now, and you wouldn't guess who it was.
Can you give us a little teaser about where you are, how far along you are, or kind of give us a sense of what's coming?
The first draft basically is behind your face in my computer. Like it's back here somewhere.
Right, the whole first draft.
Pretty much. Yeah. I still can't sleep at night. I still come up going, God, but I'm just going to leave it for a few months and then we'll go through it.
Yeah, and you've been through that once. That's part of the strange thing about writing is when it goes from something you can play with and think about and enjoy throughout the day to something that just is out in the world and you can't touch it anymore. It's its own thing. Yeah. We have a question. You see it's popped up there. When you were fleshing out your characters, do you ever picture specific people to help you differentiate their voices? And are you thinking of endowing them with facets of yourself?
I think definitely for me, myself does come up a little bit and I have to curtail that all the time. But Kess loves beer and the food she eats and all that's just all me in a sense. I mean, so she's adopted that from me. But definitely real people and definitely images of people. You put an image out and you look at it and you think that's exactly who that person looks like in my mind. And that's important. That's an important thing that I learned from my mate here.
Yeah, I think of it sometimes as like a tuning fork. You need to hear the sound of the character, and that could be a real person. And then from there, you can. Yeah. Has anyone recognized themselves or thought they recognized themselves?
No. It's not that specific, but I mean, one's mean perhaps is somewhere to step from. I think. Yeah.
There's another question here. Is there a chance that Beneath Her Skin will be a movie? Who would you cast? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your background in film and how that kind of connected to it. One thing I find about writing is that we've got the best budget of any form, right? You want a Jaguar? You have a Jaguar. So can you talk about the movie potential for this?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, that wouldn't be up to me. Who would I cast as Kess? Do you know, I haven't thought of that. Oh, I haven't thought of that. I'd kind of like not to answer that for a little while, because that will impact how I'm looking at her right now, I think. But it's just such a horrible process to get a film up and running right now. I mean, it wouldn't be me that did it. That's for sure. The killings. I think the first killing, because you asked the first one, I was making photographs. I was driving through the country up towards Annapolis Valley, and I was watching those tractors with the spike on the front, piercing the hay bales and lifting them up and putting them onto the back of a. I got some really nice photographs. The weather was beautiful and whatnot, and I just thought, oh my gosh, what if there's an animal in that bale? And that's how that started.
And you maybe don't want to talk details about some of the ones that happened further on, but some of them, you know, they're reminding me of some, like there was a very wealthy couple in Toronto that was murdered mysteriously a few years ago, and some of that seemed. So I would like, how did you construct the other ones without necessarily telling us what was in them? How did you come up with them?
Just imagination, like just retribution, imagination. I don't know. I just dreamt them up, I think. It's not a very good answer, I know, but
that's what the writing part is all about.
That's a pretty weak answer. Well, I mean, when you're involved in a story and you're writing it, things do come to you, and I never believed that. Shandy was always telling me that, and I never believed that. And the first book I was trying to write, which is still sitting around trying to write it, this guy's walking along the road, and a dog came out and walked with him. And I honestly did not plan that. It just happened. And so there's a bit of that goes on when you're writing, and I don't know where that comes from. I guess you just get invested in it or something.
Yeah, and in my experience, when writing nonfiction, real books, they become more and more specific and concrete as you try and nail them to the page. Yeah. And fiction is almost the opposite. You start and they just run off.
Yeah,
and become alive. It's an odd thing as a writer that I find fiction much more alive in my head than nonfiction. Fiction is the real thing.
Yeah, you get involved in it. Someone asked Kate Atkinson, Elmore Leonard, Joe Nesbo, and then Ian Rankin. Those are ones who I really, really like.
And we've got a question. You say you sketch out the plot first. So do you see that as a clear trajectory or as key moments, images that you then string together?
Yeah, it starts with a trajectory and then it gets more fleshed out. I guess if you were the plot's got to. I start with a little line, sort of non-words, like maybe on or non-writing, as it were, but with a pen on a piece of paper, and I start out with kind of where the story is going, and then I get typing the structure. You know, I keep thinking of it like sort of architecture, and then you can take the roof off and add a different roof later because that roof didn't work once you get into it. That's the way I do it anyway. I'm sure it's not the great way to do other kinds of books, but that's the way I do these kinds anyway.
I heard Ian Rankin once say that even 20 books in, as successful as he was, he still would get to a point where he just sort of lost his nerve and he's like, I don't know how this is going to get resolved. I don't. So did you ever have those moments where the book?
I have it now. Like literally, the other day I had a big chat with Shandy. She said, just keep going. We can rub it out later. Yeah, definitely.
Do we have any more questions? We're getting towards the end of our hour.
I guess the other thing, John, is if it's unreasonable, if it's too far-fetched, I don't think these books work. I just read one, I don't know, a few months ago, and it was so outrageous, and it's highly rated. I couldn't finish it. Do you know, like there has to be a credibility, I think, to the story. Sorry, I just threw that in.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. It's part of the rules of writing. You know, with fiction, it has to be believable. With nonfiction, no, it doesn't. It just has to be provable. With nonfiction,
exactly.
You have to prove it happened, not that it's likely.
Malcolm Gladwell has a great podcast on that. Yeah.
Well, I think we're getting to the end of our hour. Kate, did you want to come back in to say any words? Or Chris, did you have anything you wanted to?
John, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Kate, thank you.
Thank you both. And I'm wondering, I'm not sure that everyone got to see the video that opened this thing. So I think maybe we should end on the video. What do you think? Yeah. And also I want to say that the book is available online at Indigo and Amazon, and of course at your local bookstore. You know, and if you go anywhere and it isn't there, ask for it, and you know they'll bring it in. And the more people that are asking, the more copies they'll bring in. So it's an amazing book. If you love mysteries, you're gonna love this one. So
if you love writing, you're gonna love this one. So buy it, put it in your pocket, put it in your purse. You will be happy.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Let me find the movie, and away we go.